On the morning of January 14th, 1983, Pastor Harold Lindgren climbed the bell tower of First Lutheran Church in Hadley, Minnesota, to check the rope mechanism before Sunday service. At 7:42 a.m., the church secretary heard the bells ring once, a single, unscheduled toll, then nothing. Sheriff's deputies found him at the base of the tower ladder, neck broken, the trapdoor above him latched from the inside. Carver County ruled it accidental within 3 days. Case closed before the snow melted off his grave. But they never explained how a man falls down a ladder and latches a door above himself. They never explained why his office had been emptied of every cassette tape he owned. And they never explained the $13,000 in cash found sewn into the lining of his winter coat. Money a Lutheran pastor making $19,000 a year had no business carrying. Catherine Voss arrived in Hadley 11 months later, driving a rusted Dodge Aspen with a broken heater and a box of research materials in the back seat. She was 34 years old, a staff writer for the Minneapolis Tribune, and she had been investigating agricultural fraud in southern Minnesota for 2 years. Pastor Lindgren's name had appeared in 3 separate tip letters she'd received. Anonymous, typed on the same machine, postmarked from 3 different towns. Each letter said the same thing. Ask about the grain elevator. Ask about the Christmas fund. Ask why the pastor died. She parked across from the church and sat watching the building for a long moment. The steeple rose white against the December sky, ordinary and clean, giving nothing away. Voss pulled her recorder from her bag, pressed record, and spoke into it.
December 9th, 1983, Hadley, Minnesota. Population 812. I'm here about Harold Lindgren.
The church office smelled like mimeograph ink and burnt coffee. The new pastor, a young man named David Erickson, sat behind a metal desk that was too large for him. His hands folded like he was waiting for a sermon to start.
I'm not sure what I can tell you, Miss Voss. I didn't know Pastor Lindgren. I arrived in March.
I'm interested in his research, his recordings.
Erickson's hands tightened slightly.
I don't know anything about recordings.
He made them during counseling sessions, kept detailed audio notes. The congregation knew about it.
If such things existed, they weren't here when I arrived. The office was quite empty.
Who emptied it?
I couldn't say. The church council handled the transition.
Voss wrote something in her notebook. Erickson watched her pen move like it was a weapon.
Who's on the church council?
I really think you should speak with them directly. I'm just the pastor here. I conduct services.
The Hadley Grain Cooperative occupied a complex of concrete silos on the north edge of town, visible from every street, casting long shadows across the frozen fields. Voss parked in the gravel lot and watched trucks move in and out, hauling grain to the rail depot 3 miles east. The main office was a prefab building with wood paneling inside, the walls covered with commodity prices and USDA posters about loan programs. A woman in her 50s sat behind the counter, sorting pink carbon copies.
I'm looking for records on the Christmas fund. You from the government? Tribune, Minneapolis.
The woman's hands stopped moving.
We don't have a Christmas fund. Pastor Lindgren mentioned it in his letters to the synod. A charitable distribution. Grain cooperative employees contributing to families in need. I've worked here 11 years. There's no Christmas fund. Then what did Pastor Lindgren mean? I don't know what Pastor Lindgren meant about anything. And I don't know you.
Voss found the Carver County Sheriff's Office in the basement of the courthouse, a brick building with a copper dome gone green from weather. Deputy Wayne Halverson was the only officer on duty, a heavy man in his 40s eating a sandwich at his desk.
Lindgren case? That's closed.
I'd like to see the file.
It's closed.
Public records request. I can file the paperwork, or you can save us both the trouble.
Halverson chewed slowly, watching her.
You're from the cities.
Minneapolis.
Folks from Minneapolis come down here. They think we're all stupid. Think we don't know how things work.
I don't think that.
Pastor fell. Ice on the ladder. Happens every winter to somebody. Tragic, but it happens.
The trap door was latched from inside.
Halverson stopped chewing.
Who told you that?
The responding officer's report. Filed with the county clerk before the case was closed.
That report's got errors in it. Preliminary observations. Corrected in the final.
Can I see the final?
It's closed.
The Hadley Motor Lodge had 12 rooms and a coffee maker in the lobby that hadn't worked since 1978. Voss paid for a week in advance and spread her research across the bed. 3 tip letters, Lindgren's obituary from the Carver County Herald, a photocopy of his ordination certificate, and a list of names she'd compiled from synod records, every member of First Lutheran's Church Council in January 1983. She circled 3 names: Earl Lindquist, bank president; Vernon Schroeder, county commissioner; Donald Haugen, owner of the grain elevator. All 3 had served on the council for over 15 years. All 3 had signed the letter accepting Lindgren's resignation from his position as council treasurer, a resignation dated January 12th, 2 days before he died.
He quit. Then he died.
She pressed record on her tape machine.
Council forced him out. Question is what he found and where he put it.
Earl Lindquist's bank occupied the corner of Main and 2nd, a 2-story brick building with gold lettering on the windows that said, Farmers and Merchants since 1921. Voss waited in the lobby for 40 minutes before a secretary led her to a wood-paneled office on the 2nd floor. Lindquist was 71 years old, thin and precise, wearing a suit that cost more than Voss made in a month.
I have 10 minutes, Miss Voss. The Tribune called ahead. I'm cooperating as a courtesy.
I appreciate that. I'm interested in Pastor Lindgren's role as council treasurer.
Harold was a fine man, a fine pastor. His death was a tragedy.
Why did he resign from the council?
Health concerns. He was 63. The work was demanding.
He resigned 2 days before he died.
Coincidence. A sad one.
What were his duties as treasurer?
Oversight. The church accounts. Donations. The building fund.
The Christmas fund?
Lindquist's expression didn't change, but his hands moved to his desk, touching a pen, aligning it with the blotter.
I'm not familiar with that term.
The county clerk's office was on the 1st floor of the courthouse, a long room with filing cabinets against every wall. A woman named Doris Fjellstead had worked there for 31 years, and she watched Voss flip through property records with visible discomfort.
You can't take those out of the building.
I'm just looking.
Looking for what?
Voss didn't answer. She was reading a deed transfer from 1979. 40 acres of farmland sold from the Olson family to the Hadley Grain Cooperative for $12,000. The assessed value was $60,000.
This is interesting.
It's a property record.
The Olsons sold their land for 1/5 of its value to the grain elevator.
People make their own choices.
There are 6 more transfers like this, all to the cooperative, all below market value.
Fjellstead stood up from her desk.
We close at 4:30.
It's 3:15.
I need to reorganize those files. You'll have to come back tomorrow.
The VFW hall served beer until 9 on weeknights, and by 7 o'clock, Voss had learned more about Hadley from the bartender than from anyone official. His name was Gene, and he'd known Harold Lindgren for 20 years.
Pastor wasn't political. That's what people don't understand. He didn't care about the cooperative or the bank or any of that. He cared about people.
But he was asking questions.
He was worried. Last few months, he was worried about something.
About what?
Families in the congregation, farm families. They were losing their land, and Harold couldn't figure out why. Good farmers, solid people. Suddenly they're selling out, moving to town, working at the elevator.
The cooperative was buying their farms.
That's what Harold thought too. But here's the thing. Those families, they weren't complaining. They were grateful. Said the cooperative saved them.
Saved them from what?
That's what Harold kept asking. Nobody would tell him.
The tip letters had been typed on a Smith Corona Electric, the kind with a distinctive E that struck slightly high. Voss had checked. There were 4 Smith Corona Electrics in Hadley. One at the bank, one at the grain elevator, one at the high school, and one in the church office. She sat in her motel room, comparing the letters to samples she'd collected during the day. The bank's machine had a broken T-key. The elevator's was a different model entirely. But the church sample, a mimeographed bulletin from last Easter, matched perfectly.
Someone in that church sent these letters. Someone who knew Lindgren. Someone who's still there.
She looked at the 3 postmarks. Different towns, different dates, all within 50 miles. Someone had driven out of Hadley 3 times to mail these letters, making sure they couldn't be traced back.
You're scared, but you wanted someone to come asking.
She pulled out the church directory and began reading names. Vernon Schroeder's farm was 3 miles south of town, a white house with green shutters and a barn that hadn't held cattle in years. The county commissioner met Voss on his front porch, not inviting her inside.
I don't talk to reporters.
I'm writing about Pastor Lindgren. The Tribune is interested in his community work.
Harold's dead. Write about the living.
He was treasurer of the church council. You served with him.
15 years. So what?
So you might know why he resigned 2 days before he died.
Schroeder was 64, built like a man who'd worked fields his whole life, with hands that could crush walnuts. He looked at Voss like she was something the wind had blown onto his property.
Harold was tired. Simple as that.
Tired of what?
You ever run a church? It's work. Hard work. Harold did it for 22 years. Man was entitled to rest.
He rested permanently 2 days later.
That's a cruel thing to say, Miss Voss. Real cruel.
The Hadley Public Library was 1 room in the basement of the town hall, staffed by a volunteer 3 afternoons a week. Voss found the Carver County Herald archives in cardboard boxes along the back wall, unindexed and covered in dust. She started with 1975 and worked forward, reading every issue, making notes. By 1979, a pattern emerged. Farm foreclosure notices, appearing monthly, sometimes weekly. Families who'd worked the same land for generations, suddenly losing everything. And then, nothing. The foreclosure stopped.
1980. Not a single foreclosure. 81, 82, nothing.
She cross-referenced with the property transfers she'd copied at the clerk's office. The dates matched. Families facing foreclosure were selling to the grain cooperative instead, for below-market prices, but enough to clear their debts.
The cooperative was buying out distressed farms, saving families from foreclosure. But where was the money coming from?
She found a small article from March 1980. Hadley Grain Cooperative receives federal development grant. The amount? $200,000. Donald Haugen owned not just the grain elevator, but half the commercial property in Hadley. His office was above the hardware store he'd inherited from his father, and he received Voss with the practiced warmth of a man who'd been selling things his whole life.
Coffee? It's fresh.
Thank you. I'm interested in the federal grant the cooperative received in 1980.
Good memory. That was a lifeline for this community. Farm crisis was hitting hard. We used that money to buy distressed properties, keep families from losing everything.
At below market prices.
Fair prices. What the market would bear at the time. Land values were collapsing.
But the cooperative made money when values recovered.
We're a cooperative. Profits go back to members.
Pastor Lindgren was asking about this before he died.
Haugen's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes went still.
Harold asked about a lot of things. He was a curious man. It's what made him a good pastor.
What did you tell him?
The truth. Same thing I'm telling you.
The church secretary was named Mildred Torkelson. She was 73 years old, had worked at First Lutheran for 31 years, and she met Voss at the Cozy Corner Cafe because she refused to talk at the church.
I shouldn't be here.
I appreciate you coming.
Pastor Erickson doesn't know. Nobody knows.
You found him! Pastor Lindgren!
Mildred's hands trembled around her coffee cup.
I came in early that morning to set up for the women's Bible study. The bell rang once, just once, and then I heard the sound.
The trap door was latched.
From the inside. I told Deputy Halverson. I told him exactly what I saw. That door was latched. You can't fall through a latched door.
What did he say?
He said I was upset, confused. Said I probably unlatched it myself when I went up to check.
Did you?
I never went up. I saw him at the bottom of the ladder. I ran for help.
Mrs. Torkelson, who emptied Pastor Lindgren's office?
The old woman looked at Voss with eyes that had been holding something for 11 months.
Earl Lindquist. The morning of the funeral, before the family even arrived.
Voss drove to the county courthouse in the next town over, Marshall, 20 miles east, where records couldn't be reorganized to avoid her. She spent 4 hours in their archives, pulling USDA grant applications from 1979 and 1980. The Hadley Grain Cooperative's application was 43 pages long. It promised to use federal funds for equipment upgrades and storage expansion. The supporting documentation included letters from community leaders, the county commissioner, the bank president, the pastor of First Lutheran Church.
Lindgren signed off on this.
She read his letter. It praised the cooperative's commitment to family farmers. It described the Christmas Fund, a charitable program to help families in crisis. It promised strict oversight of all federal money.
He believed in it. He thought they were helping people.
She found the disbursement records next. $200,000 released in quarterly payments. But the quarterly reports showed only $140,000 in documented expenses.
$60,000. Where did $60,000 go?
That night, someone followed Voss back to the motel. She noticed the headlights 3 miles outside of Hadley, a truck keeping steady distance, never passing, never falling back. When she pulled into the motor lodge, the truck drove past slowly, then circled the block. Voss stood at her window, watching. The truck was a Ford, dark-colored, with the kind of rust pattern that meant it had spent winters in Minnesota. It passed twice more, then disappeared.
Someone's nervous.
She checked the lock on her door, then pulled her research off the bed and packed it into her suitcase. If anyone searched her room, they'd find nothing. She slept with her car keys in her hand and her shoes on. At 3 a.m, she heard footsteps in the parking lot. They stopped outside her door, then continued past. She didn't sleep again until dawn. The Olson farm was 4 miles north of town, now part of the cooperative's holdings. Helen Olson still lived in the farmhouse, paying rent to the people who had bought her family's land. She was 58 years old, and she opened the door with a shotgun in her hands.
I don't want any trouble.
Mrs. Olson, I'm a reporter. I'm writing about the farm crisis.
We're past crisis. Crisis was 5 years ago.
You sold your farm to the cooperative in 1979. 40 acres for $12,000.
Helen lowered the shotgun slightly.
That's public record.
The land was worth $60,000.
Land's worth what someone will pay. Nobody was paying anything in 79.
But you kept the house.
Part of the deal. We sell the land, we get to stay. Pay rent, it's not much.
Who arranged that deal, Mrs. Olson?
Helen's face changed. Something complicated moved behind her eyes.
The cooperative. Mr. Haugen.
And the bank? Mr. Lindquist?
I don't want to talk about the bank.
Voss found 3 more families that afternoon. The Bergstroms, who'd sold 80 acres in 1980. The Dahls, who'd sold 120. The Petersons, who'd lost everything except a quarter-acre lot where their trailer now sat. Every story was the same. Bank called in the loans. Cooperative offered to buy. Families had no choice.
We were 3 months behind on payments. Bank sent a letter. Pay in full or they foreclose. We didn't have it. Then Mr. Haugen called.
What did he say?
Said the cooperative could help. They'd buy the farm, pay off the bank, let us keep the house and a little land. Said it was better than losing everything.
Was it?
My grandfather built that farm. His father cleared the land. We had it for 112 years.
Peterson's voice cracked.
Now I work at the elevator, loading grain that used to be mine. So you tell me, was it better?
Voss spread her notes across the motel bed that night, building a timeline. 1978. Farm crisis begins. Families start defaulting on loans. 1979. Lindquist's bank calls in loans aggressively, threatening foreclosure. Same year. Cooperative applies for federal grant, gets $200,000. 1980. Cooperative begins buying distressed farms below market value. Families avoid foreclosure but lose their land.
The bank creates the crisis. The cooperative solves it. Both make money.
She drew lines connecting names. Lindquist at the bank calling loans. Schroeder as county commissioner, approving the grant application. Haugen at the cooperative, buying the land. All three on the church council. All three signers of Lindgren's resignation letter.
Lindgren was treasurer. He saw the money moving. He knew something was wrong.
She pulled out the grant disbursement records. 200,000 in, 140,000 documented out, 60,000 missing.
The Christmas Fund. That's what they called it. Charity for struggling families.
But the families she'd interviewed had never received charity. They'd sold their land.
It wasn't charity. It was a slush fund.
The next morning, Voss found her car sitting on 4 flat tires. All 4 valve stems had been removed. She stood in the parking lot, breath fogging in the cold, and looked at the damage for a long moment.
That's a shame. Kids these days.
The clerk was a thin man in his 30s who hadn't made eye contact with Voss once in 4 days.
You see anything last night?
I was asleep. We closed the office at 10.
There's a camera over the door.
Broken. Been broken for months.
Voss walked to the payphone outside the gas station and called the Tribune. Her editor answered on the 3rd ring.
I need you to run a property search. Carver County, Minnesota. Every land transfer involving the Hadley Grain Cooperative since 1979. And I need you to call the USDA. There's a grant that doesn't add up. You okay? You sound... Someone doesn't want me here. That means I'm asking the right questions.
While she waited for new tires, Voss walked to the church. It was unlocked, as small-town churches often were, and she sat in a pew near the back, looking at the bell tower access door in the narthex. The ladder was wooden, worn smooth from decades of hands. The trapdoor at the top was simple, a hinged panel with a latch that could only be fastened from below. She climbed halfway up and looked.
If you're standing on the ladder, you can't reach the latch. It's too far.
She descended and stood at the base, looking up. Lindgren had fallen here, broken his neck on the concrete floor. The official story said he slipped on ice.
There's no ice inside a church.
She pressed record on her tape machine.
December 11th, 1983. First Lutheran Church, Hadley. The trap-door latch is 4 feet from the top of the ladder. To close it from below, you'd need to be standing on the floor of the bell chamber, not on the ladder. Pastor Lindgren didn't fall. Someone was up there with him.
Mildred Torkelson found Voss in the church. The old secretary moved quietly for her age, appearing at the end of the pew like she'd materialized from the shadows.
You shouldn't be here alone.
Mrs. Torkelson, I was hoping to see you.
I saw your car, heard what happened.
Someone wants me to leave.
Someone wants everyone to leave things alone.
Mildred sat down in the pew, her hands folded in her lap.
Harold kept copies of everything. That's what you need to know.
Copies of what?
Financial records. The council didn't know. He made copies of every check, every ledger entry, every deposit slip, kept them somewhere safe.
Where?
I don't know. But he told me once, if anything ever happened, if anyone ever came asking, to tell them about the copies. He said the truth was somewhere the council would never think to look.
Mrs. Torkelson, why didn't you tell anyone this before?
The old woman's eyes filled with tears.
Because I was afraid. I'm still afraid. But Harold deserved better than what they gave him.
Voss spent the rest of the day thinking about where a Lutheran pastor would hide documents. The church had been searched. Lindquist had seen to that. The parsonage had been cleaned out when the new pastor arrived. Lindgren's widow had moved to Minneapolis to live with her daughter, taking only personal effects. She drove the streets of Hadley, looking at the town the way Lindgren might have seen it. The church, the bank, the grain elevator, the cemetery where he was buried.
The cemetery.
She pulled over and sat for a moment, thinking. Lindgren had been pastor for 22 years. He'd buried hundreds of congregation members. He knew that cemetery better than anyone.
Somewhere the council would never think to look.
She drove to the cemetery as the sun was setting. The headstones cast long shadows across the snow. Lindgren's grave was near the back, a simple marker with his name and dates. But Voss wasn't looking at his grave.
Who did you trust, Pastor? Who did you trust enough to keep your secrets?
The church records listed every funeral Harold Lindgren had conducted. Voss found the ledger in the County Historical Society's collection, a donation from the church during a cleaning 3 years earlier. She read through 22 years of deaths, looking for a name that meant something. Most were elderly. Natural deaths. Expected. But in 1975, there was an entry that made her stop. Walter Haugen, father of Donald Haugen, died of a heart attack at 61, buried in the family plot at the Lutheran cemetery.
Lindgren buried Haugen's father.
The funeral notes included a detail that caught her eye. Pastor Lindgren had been asked to read a special passage, a verse from Proverbs about honest scales and just measures. The family had requested it specifically.
Honest scales. For the father of the man who would later steal federal money.
She checked the cemetery map. The Haugen family plot was in the old section, near the original church building that had burned in 1932.
Near where the old church stood, where the council would never think to look.
The next morning, Voss returned to the cemetery with a small garden trowel she'd bought at the hardware store. The Haugen family plot was marked by a granite monument, with smaller headstones for individual family members. Walter Haugen's grave was on the left, undisturbed for 8 years. She didn't dig at the grave. Instead, she looked at the base of the family monument, a 3-foot granite block with a bronze plaque. The ground around it had settled differently than the surrounding earth, as if something had been disturbed.
Lindgren wouldn't have dug up a grave, but he might have hidden something under a monument.
She cleared snow from the base and found what she was looking for, a seam where the granite met the earth that was wider than it should be. She worked the trowel into the gap and felt something hollow beneath.
A cavity. Someone built a space under this monument.
She reached in and pulled out a metal strongbox, rusted at the corners but still sealed. Inside were cassette tapes, ledger pages, and a letter in Harold Lindgren's handwriting. Voss sat in her car with the heater running, reading Lindgren's letter. It was dated January 10th, 1983, 4 days before his death.
To whoever finds this, I have tried to do the right thing and failed. The men I trusted have betrayed not just me, but every family in this community. The federal grant was a fraud from the beginning. Lindquist, Schroeder, and Haugen created a scheme to steal from the government and from their neighbors. They used the bank to force foreclosures, the cooperative to buy land cheap, and the grant money to pay themselves. $60,000 has disappeared into their pockets. The Christmas fund was never charity, it was a bribe. Payments to keep people quiet.
Voss turned the page.
I confronted them at the council meeting on January 8th. They told me to resign or they would destroy me. They said no one would believe a pastor over 3 pillars of the community. They were right. I am putting this evidence where they will never look, with the one honest man in the Haugen family. Walter would be ashamed of what his son has become. If you are reading this, please, make them answer for what they've done.
The cassette tapes were labeled in Lindgren's careful handwriting. Council meeting, 1/8/83. Haugen interview, 12/15/82. Lindquist's confrontation, 1/9/83. Voss drove to the Marshall Motor Inn 20 miles away from anyone who might be watching and listened to them all.
Harold, you're making a mistake. These accusations, they'll destroy you. No one will believe you.
I have the records, Earl. I have copies of everything. The disbursements don't match the expenses. $60,000 went somewhere, and it wasn't to farming families.
You don't understand how things work. The grant required matching funds. We had to show expenses.
You falsified federal documents.
We saved this community.
You stole from it.
Harold, I'm asking you, as a friend, as someone who has sat beside you in that church for 15 years, let this go. For your own sake, for your family's sake.
Voss stopped the tape. She had everything she needed. Voss called her editor from a payphone in Marshall and talked for 40 minutes. She read him passages from Lindgren's letter. She described the property transfers, the grant disbursements, the families who had lost everything.
This is big, Catherine. Federal fraud, conspiracy, possibly murder. But we need more than a dead pastor's accusation. I have tapes. I have financial records. I have 6 families willing to testify about how they were pressured. The tapes are hearsay. The records are copies. A good lawyer could tear this apart. Then what do I need? Someone inside. Someone who is part of it and is willing to talk. Without that, it's one man's word against 3 pillars of the community.
Voss thought about Mildred Torkelson's tears, about Helen Olson's shotgun, about the Peterson family living in a trailer on land their great-grandfather had cleared.
There's someone who's been waiting for the right time. Can you get them on record? I can try.
Voss drove back to Hadley after midnight. She didn't go to the motel, too exposed. Instead, she parked behind the VFW hall and slept in her car, waking every hour to run the engine and stay warm. At dawn, she drove to Mildred Torkelson's house. It was a small bungalow on Elm Street, with a bird feeder in the front yard and lace curtains in every window. Mildred answered the door in her bathrobe.
Miss Voss, it's 6 in the morning.
I found the copies. The tapes, everything Pastor Lindgren hid.
Mildred's hand went to her chest.
Where?
Under the Haugen monument. He hid them with Walter Haugen.
Dear God.
Mrs. Torkelson, I need your help. I need you to tell me what you saw on January 14th. Not what you told the sheriff. What you really saw.
Mildred stood in her doorway for a long moment, looking at Voss with an expression that was equal parts fear and relief.
Come inside. I'll make coffee.
Mildred's kitchen smelled like instant coffee and 40 years of Lutheran bake sales. She sat across from Voss at a small formica table, her hands wrapped around a cup for warmth.
I didn't just find Harold at the bottom of the ladder. I saw someone leaving.
Who?
I couldn't see clearly. It was early, the lights weren't on, but I saw someone going out the side door of the church, moving fast.
Did you tell the sheriff?
I tried. Deputy Halverson said I was confused, said I was in shock. He wrote it down, but it never made it into the report.
What else did you see?
Mildred set down her cup.
Harold's hands. When I found them, his hands were clenched, like he'd been fighting. And there was something under his fingernails. I told the deputy, but they never tested for anything.
Could you identify the person you saw leaving?
No, but I know the coat they were wearing. Dark green with a brown collar. Vernon Schroeder has a coat like that. He's worn it to church every Sunday for 15 years.
Voss found Vernon Schroeder at his farm, feeding cattle in a barn that hadn't seen repairs in 20 years. He didn't seem surprised to see her.
Figured you'd be back.
Someone saw you leaving the church the morning Pastor Lindgren died.
Schroeder continued forking hay. He didn't look up.
That's so.
Green coat, brown collar. You've worn it to church every Sunday for 15 years.
Lots of folks have coats like that.
I have Pastor Lindgren's tapes, Mr. Schroeder. I have his financial records. I have his letter explaining exactly what you, Lindquist and Haugen did with that federal grant money. The Tribune is running the story next week.
Schroeder stopped moving. The pitchfork hung in the air.
The only question is whether the story mentions you as a witness or a suspect. You have a choice to make.
You don't know what you're messing with.
I know exactly what I'm messing with. Federal fraud, embezzlement, and maybe murder. The question is, how much of it you want to carry alone?
Schroeder set down the pitchfork and walked to the barn door. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at his land. Land his family had worked for 3 generations.
I didn't kill Harold.
But you were there.
I was there because Earl called me. Said Harold was going to destroy everything. Said we needed to talk to him together, make him see reason.
What happened?
We met him at the church. Early, before anyone else arrived. Earl did most of the talking. Said Harold was being naive, that the grant money was just creative accounting. Said nobody got hurt.
But someone did get hurt.
Harold wouldn't back down. He said he was going to the synod, going to the FBI. Earl got angry. They started arguing. Harold went up to the bell tower, said he needed to think, to pray. Earl followed him.
And then?
Schroeder's voice dropped.
I heard the bell ring. One time. Then nothing. When Earl came down, he told me Harold fell. Told me to leave and keep my mouth shut.
Voss recorded everything. Schroeder talked for 2 hours, describing a scheme that had been running for 4 years. Lindquist at the bank identified struggling farms and called in their loans. Haugen at the cooperative bought the land cheap, using grant money that was supposed to help farmers. Schroeder, as county commissioner, approved the paperwork and looked the other way.
The Christmas fund was Earl's idea. Cash payments to the families we bought out. Hush money. Made them feel like we were helping them.
How much did you take?
I got $10,000 over 4 years. Earl and Don split the rest.
$50,000 between them.
Harold figured it out by looking at the church accounts. The cooperative made donations, big donations, that matched up with the grant disbursements. He traced the money.
And he confronted you.
He wanted us to confess. Give the money back. Turn ourselves in. Said it was the Christian thing to do.
Schroeder laughed bitterly.
Earl said there was no going back. Said we were all in too deep. Said Harold would destroy the whole town if he talked.
Voss drove straight to the bank. It was 2 p.m. and the lobby was quiet. Just a teller and a customer at the counter. She walked past them and up the stairs to Lindquist's office without stopping.
Ma'am, you can't...
She opened the door without knocking. Lindquist was at his desk, reading the Wall Street Journal. He looked up with the expression of a man who had been expecting this moment.
Miss Voss, I wondered when you'd come.
Vernon Schroeder just gave me a 2-hour interview. On tape. He says you pushed Harold Lindgren from the bell tower.
Lindquist set down his newspaper with deliberate care.
Vernon is a frightened man. He'll say anything to save himself.
He says you followed Lindgren up to the tower. He heard the bell ring, and then you came down alone.
Vernon has a vivid imagination.
The Tribune runs this story in 5 days. With Schroeder's testimony, Lindgren's recordings, and the financial records he hid. Your name is all over it.
I'm sure it is.
Lindquist stood and walked to his window, looking down at Main Street. His back was straight, his voice calm.
Do you know what this town was like in 1978, Miss Voss? Farms failing every week, families losing everything, children going hungry.
I've talked to those families. They lost their land to you.
They kept their homes. They kept their dignity. They didn't have to see their names in the foreclosure notices.
You stole $60,000 in federal money.
I saved this community. The grant was bureaucratic nonsense, forms and reports and requirements that would have taken years to comply with. We needed money now. We needed action.
You needed a bigger house, a new car, trips to Minneapolis.
Lindquist turned from the window.
I've given 40 years to this town. Every loan I've made, every decision, has been for the good of Hadley.
Including pushing a pastor from a bell tower.
Harold was going to destroy everything we'd built. Everything I'd built. He didn't understand what was at stake.
Lindquist reached into his desk drawer. Voss tensed, but he only pulled out a checkbook.
Everyone has a price, Miss Voss. What's yours?
You're trying to bribe me.
I'm trying to be practical. The Tribune is a business. Businesses need money. I'm offering to make a substantial donation to whatever cause you think is worthy.
You killed a man.
Harold fell. He was upset. He was careless, and he fell. That's what the report says. That's what the evidence shows.
The evidence shows a trap door latched from inside, and a witness who saw you leave.
Lindquist's hand tightened on his pen.
Mildred Torkelson is a 73-year-old woman who was in shock. Her testimony means nothing.
Vernon Schroeder isn't 73, and he was right there with you.
For the first time, something flickered in Lindquist's eyes. Not fear, calculation.
Vernon will say whatever you want him to say. He's weak. He's always been weak. But his word against mine, in this town, you'll lose.
Voss stood her ground. She had been threatened before, by politicians, by businessmen, by people with far more power than a small-town bank president. She knew the look in Lindquist's eyes. It was the look of a man who had already decided what he was willing to do.
Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Lindquist. I'm going to walk out of this office. I'm going to drive to Minneapolis. And in 5 days, the Tribune is going to publish everything. The fraud, the embezzlement, the murder. Every family you stole from will read it. Every person you bribed will see their name. And when the FBI comes asking questions, they'll have Harold Lindgren's recordings to guide them.
You're making a mistake.
The only mistake was yours. You thought you could buy everyone. You thought silence was permanent. But Harold Lindgren knew something you didn't.
What's that?
The truth doesn't stay buried. It just waits.
She turned and walked to the door. Behind her, she heard Lindquist's chair scrape against the floor.
Miss Voss, you should be very careful driving back to the cities. These roads can be dangerous in winter.
Voss didn't drive back to Minneapolis alone. She called Gene at the VFW, and he rode with her in his pickup truck, following close behind. They stopped at the state patrol station in Marshall, where she filed a report about the threatening statement and the flat tires. The officer on duty took notes and promised to pass them along to the county sheriff. By the time she reached the Tribune building, it was after midnight. Her editor was waiting in the parking lot with a security guard.
You okay? I'm fine. I have everything. The tapes, the records, all of it. Plus a recorded confession from one of the conspirators.
Her editor looked at her for a long moment.
Catherine, this is going to blow up. State investigation, federal charges, maybe a murder trial. You ready for that? Harold Lindgren has been dead for 11 months. His killers have been living in that town like nothing happened. Someone has to make them answer. That's not what I asked. Yes, I'm ready.
The story ran on Sunday, December 18th, 1983. Front page above the fold. Federal fraud in Carver County. Pastor's death linked to embezzlement scheme. Voss had written 12,000 words. The Tribune printed every one. By Monday, the FBI had opened an investigation. By Wednesday, Vernon Schroeder had turned himself in, offering full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. By Friday, Donald Haugen had fled to Canada, where he would be arrested 3 weeks later at his sister's house in Winnipeg. Earl Lindquist didn't run. On Thursday morning, he drove to First Lutheran Church, climbed the bell tower ladder, and stepped off the platform where Harold Lindgren had died 11 months earlier. The bells rang twice as he fell, once on the way down, once when he hit the floor. His suicide note was 3 sentences long. It said, "I did what I thought was right. I was wrong. God forgive me." 6 months later, Catherine Voss returned to Hadley. The grain elevator was under new management. The bank had been taken over by a regional chain. Vernon Schroeder was serving 3 years at the federal minimum security facility in Duluth. She walked through the cemetery to Harold Lindgren's grave. Someone had placed fresh flowers there, yellow roses, out of season, probably ordered from Minneapolis. The headstone was simple: Harold James Lindgren, 1919 to 1983. Beloved pastor. Voss stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the bare trees. The church bells began to ring, noon on a Saturday, calling no one to anything, just marking time the way they had for 100 years.
You were right, Pastor. The truth doesn't stay buried.
She placed her hand on the cold stone, then turned and walked back to her car. There were other stories waiting, other truths that needed finding. But she would remember this one: the bells, the snow, the quiet grave of a man who died because he wouldn't stop asking questions.